good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the Hustings. It's lovely to see so many of you here. My name is Giles Goddard, and I'm the vicar of this church. I'm also the treasurer of the South Bank and Waterloo Neighbourhood Forum, SOAN. And this is an event which has been jointly hosted by SOAN and, what do you call it now? Better Bankside?
Living Bankside.
Living Bankside. It's one of two Hustings. There's one for the neighbouring constituency on Thursday, so if you haven't had enough of Hustings, you can go to that one as well. But this is very much focusing on this constituency, Vauxhall. And it's lovely to have so many of you here. Just to say that if the fire alarm goes off, it is not a test. And the fire exit is there and there. And if you need to go to the toilet, it's through there. I'm going to hand you over now to Amir Eden, who's going to chair this and has pulled it all together. So Amir, thank you very much for your hard work in bringing it together. And thank you to all the candidates for being with us. Have a very good evening, everybody.
So I just want to echo what Giles has said. Thank you very much for coming tonight, and I want to also say thanks to Giles and to St John's Waterloo for hosting us, and South Bank and Waterloo Neighbours for working with us on this. And to welcome the candidates here that we have. So we have Jacqueline from the Green Party, Sarah from the Conservative Party, another Sarah from the Lib Dems, Andrew from the Brexit Party, and Florence from the Labour Party. So what I'm going to do is really get on with it. We start off with some introductory remarks from each of the candidates. So if we go in alphabetical order, that is... Yeah.
Oh, is this in alphabetical?
No, it doesn't matter. If you'd like to go first with your introductory remarks, please.
Should I stand up? Or is
that
not impossible?
You can do, if you can take it out. We'll just do it like that, yeah.
Okay. I'm standing here as your Green Party candidate for Vauxhall because there's a real danger that Brexit is going to overshadow this election when we have one of the gravest situations facing not just our community, our country, but our planet, and that is the climate emergency. Now, I'm not a politician by training, but I do want to make some changes. So I come at this vital issue from the perspective of a trained ecologist. And this campaign has been a steep learning curve for me as I see how the other parties do politics. But all elections have their priorities, and it's really clear where my party places theirs on the climate. We've been talking about this issue for over 30 years, and the other parties are now finally playing catch-up. From net zero targets that are far too late and insubstantial green investment, it's clear these parties are just playing lip service. We are a party that cares about people, not about profit. We will make substantial investment in other areas that have a real community benefit and help those suffering from the worst effects of the Tory austerity programme. I can show you what the Greens stand for: honest and decent politics that doesn't shy away from tackling the gravest injustices and problems facing this country. So I urge you on the 12th of December to vote Green. Thank you.
Sarah from the Conservative Party, please.
Good evening. I would be absolutely honoured to be your MP on the 12th of December or 13th when we wake up. Ever since I was little, I've always wanted to do something where I can help and make a difference and listen to people. And my dad always said to me, actions speak louder than words. And that's what I want to do. I want to take actions for you. So I'm proud to sit here as your Conservative candidate. Because we fundamentally want to get Brexit done, which is imperative for our democracy. It also means that if we do this, that we can focus on important things that we all love and care, like our NHS, supporting our absolutely fantastic doctors and nurses. We can then focus more on investing in the police, and I would again pay tribute to the police and the fantastic efforts that they did last week with the London Bridge attacks. It also means we can focus on education, because that is the key for the future of our future generations. We can then focus also on building more homes and improving the quality of those homes, and that is particularly an issue we see across Vauxhall. And as Jackie said, we can focus on climate change, because action needs to happen, and action needs to happen now. All of which I hope to be a representative for you in Vauxhall to listen, because together we can achieve so much. Thank you.
And now Florence from the Labour Party, please.
Hi, good evening everybody. I'm Florence Session and I'm standing to be the next Labour MP for this fabulous constituency. Brixton is home for me, this is where I've grown up. Just this morning I was at Guildhall Yard with the Mayor of London, the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition and Eminem. And we saw the rest of London come together to say that we will not be cowed by terrorism. And in Vauxhall, we are strong as a big community. This part of the constituency is home to over 15,000 people, but yet we have so many big institutions and organisations here. Sometimes this part of the constituency is often left out, but we know that there are deep challenges and issues here. Challenges around how we get affordable housing, challenges around crime when we look at the visitors coming in, challenges around some of the big businesses that are coming in, challenges about development, big challenges about air quality which affects everybody. Those are some of the challenges that I want to take on as your next MP. And by doing that, it's about working with you, the community. There is so much that unites us, but yet over the last 3.5 years, the paralysis of Brexit has caused so much division. We've seen hate crime go up, disability crime go up, racist crime go up, religious crime go up. We need to make sure that we are supporting the people's vote to bring it back to the people and renegotiate so that we have a clear option. In 2016, I campaigned for Remain, and the Labour Party committed to bring that back to the people. Now we're campaigning again to remain in the EU. So I urge all of you, we've got the next few days, listen to all the candidates, but on the 12th of December, come and vote Labour. Thank you.
Sarah Lewis from the Democrats.
So for my whole life, I've been a user of the amazing transport, cultural and health services that Waterloo and the South Bank have to offer. I used to meet Granny under the clock at Waterloo Station, and I remember Alfred Bennett's Winter the Willows as the first ever play that I saw. The amazing staff at St Thomas's Hospital have helped families and friends. But for too long, people like me, people who don't live here in Waterloo, have benefited from these services, prioritised over the needs of local people who call this area home. We need to change that and make sure that this is a place where people can work, play and live happily and healthily together. Now this is a common story across our constituency. Waterloo is just the embodiment of the challenges that we face. Too often we've seen developments waved through in exchange for cash, the benefits of which never seem to reach local people, and without a thought for the impact on local well-being through air quality problems, the displacement of truly affordable housing and meaningful local jobs, and reduced high-quality open space for all of our community to enjoy. So to change this and make local people a meaningful part of change, not just by opposing planning from one scheme to the next, we really need to change our system. And if you elect me to be your next MP for Vauxhall, I will do exactly that. I will use my parliamentary powers to change our planning system away from the lunacy of the zonal planning that means that we live over here, work over here and play over there. No, we need to do those things together. I will ensure that neighbourhood plans are respected, and congratulations to the South Bank Waterloo Neighbourhood Group who got their referendum through. And I will work to change the definition of affordable housing, prioritising the building of more and better council homes at rents that local people can afford. So after December the 12th, I look forward to working with all of you as your next MP for Vauxhall. Thank you.
So we're going to go to our first question now. Oh, sorry. Apologies. We could have Andrew from Brexit Party, please.
Well, look, this is a strong Labour seat. It has been for about 30 years, and 78% of people here voted to remain. You can't hear me, sorry. Thank you. And 22% of people here voted to leave the European Union. So the best I can hope to achieve here, I can't tell you what I'm going to do as your MP, because that isn't going to happen. But what I am here is to give a meaningful choice for the 22% of people who voted to leave the EU. We haven't forgotten you, we're here, you can vote for me, and you can vote for the Conservatives as well. It depends whether you believe they're proper Brexiteers. Where I agree with what Sarah Lewis has said for the Lib Dems, and where the Brexit Party agrees, is that planning restrictions, planning law does need to be looked at. And where we agree with the Lib Dems is that we're very big on public housing. We think there's no economic argument to pay 25 bill per year in housing benefit. A lot of that money should go into new housing. So there you go. I'm here to get the best quality protest votes. If you have a protest vote, if you don't want to vote mainstream, I'm the best candidate for you.
Thank you. So once again, I'd just like to say apologies for missing you out. Now what we'll do is go to the first question. So if George is here, George Mason. No. Okay, so Giles has got the question, and Giles shall ask the question. And it's a very pertinent one.
It's a very pertinent question, and I would be asking this question if George wasn't. So now the government has committed to end its contribution to climate change through the net zero emissions target. Will you back the urgent action needed to deliver this? And also, what would your priorities be as a local MP in terms of resisting climate change?
So we'll go to Sarah for the first from the Conservative Party.
Well look, it is very important that we do hit net zero. As I said at the very beginning, we have to take action and we have to take that quickly. So the Conservative Party is actually committing huge amounts of money into making sure we're tackling these different areas. So we've got the Nature Climate Fund, which is going to be £640 million, which is putting towards planting more trees to start. So we want to do 30,000 hectares of more trees, which is equivalent to 46,000 football fields, to give you some sort of perspective there. And we also want to be looking into restoring thousands of acres of peatland, because peatland is a fantastic source of soaking up carbon dioxide. It's 3% of the world is currently covered in peatland, and it actually soaks up more than all the forests that we have in this world. So that's the start in the Climate Fund. We also want to protect our oceans, so we've got a fund towards that so we can do more surveillance and making sure that our coral is safe and that making sure there's not too much illegal fishing. In terms of what that means for here, we're going to have to take vast action in terms of making sure we reduce pollution. Florence mentioned at the beginning that we've got high levels of air quality is not great around here. So what we've got to do is encourage different forms of transport. We've got to encourage, and we are, more people into walking and cycling. We've got to see what we can do also about use of more electric cars and making buses electrified. And part of that is there's another fund that the government are putting money towards, 500 million, so that we can everyone can have a charging point, or at least be within 30 miles of a charging point, so we can roll out electric car use in the future. So it's going to be a whole range of processes that we're going to have to do, and we have to do that quickly. As I said, we can't wait for this. This is something we need to act on now.
Thank you. And now if I can hear from Sarah Lewis, please.
So it's quite clear to all of us that the quality of our air is hurting all of us, and particularly our children. And it's absolutely crucial that we take action to stop this. Fundamentally, we need to get cars off the road, and we need a much more ambitious plan that makes walking and cycling something that's the norm, not just for the most robust and hardy among us who are willing to take it on. So I would support any local initiative that would make that happen. I would also ensure that we restore the funding for our public transport, including for the bus routes that have been sorely cut in our area. And I noticed that in the neighbourhood plan locally here in Waterloo, that greenways have been suggested. Greenways that would put the onus on developers to make sure that particular routes were left clear for people to use. Now, City Hall talks the talk, but the Mayor has just pushed through a new four-way highway in East London, which doesn't seem consistent with tackling the climate emergency. Similarly, the local council, Lambeth Council, they call the climate emergency, but they continue to knock down our council homes rather than refurbish them. something that's detrimental to our community as well as detrimental to our environment. So if I were your MP, I would take action to stop that estate demolition. When it comes to airports, most of us hear, see and smell the aeroplanes flying overhead, and I am absolutely committed to the Lib Dem policy of stopping airport expansion in London, full stop, something that Labour is not committed to doing. How are we going to pay for all of this? A frequent flyer tax will also make flying more expensive than other forms of transport, but where the burden is actually on the people who use the planes the most rather than on those who are merely going back and forth to see their families once a year. And we mentioned trees. Well, I think a number of us around here have seen trees magically disappear overnight because it's favourable to whatever developer needs it to move. So trees, yes, plant more trees, but also really protect our public space, our public open space. This whole concept of privately owned public space is detrimental to the environment and also means that we're not actually able to use the green spaces that we have. So that would also be my priority. I mean, fundamentally, on climate change and the environment, if we don't take action, then it will be the poorest in our community who are hit first and hit hardest. So action is non-negotiable.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to Florence, and then I'm going to take a few questions from the floor, and then come to Jackie and Andrew. Florence. If you want to pick on Sarah's question as well.
This is a big issue, and the reality is that most people that are suffering from bad air quality, homes that are not insulated, fuel poverty, are some of our most deprived people in Vauxhall. We need those people to be part of the conversation. Growing up in a council estate, people used to say, you don't put recycling bins on estates because they're not recyclable. Actually, recycling on all our estates now has shot up. I really want to make sure I'm working with Extinction Rebellion to make sure the Citizens' Assembly is diverse of our population. To make sure that our Citizens' Assembly to address climate change is diverse. In Vauxhall, we are over 50% BME, and we need more of those people involved in these conversations. In my current role as the Assembly Member for Lambeth and Southwark, and as Chair of the Transport Committee, this is an issue I've been working on with the Mayor and Lambeth Council. This area benefited from the introduction of the ultra-low emission zone, and when I was writing to a number of residents and organisations about that, I received a lot of abuse and hostility towards that. But if we are really saying that we want to clean up London's air, we need to make sure we get the most polluting vehicles off our roads. One of the other things we need to look at is how we invest in new forms of public transport. Transport for London is the only major transport authority without direct grant from the government. As your MP, I will work hard with the rest of London MPs cross-party to make sure we reinstate that grant backing so that we can get the investment in our public transport. The other area we definitely need to look at is working with some of the big businesses around this area to make sure they're doing their bit in terms of contributing and making sure we're all united on that. We need more action on this climate change, and it needs to be something that's thought through in all our policies and legislation going forward, not just as an add-on at the end. Thank you.
So we'll go to some questions from the floor on this issue.
Can I just ask, is there no way of taking the microphone out of the stand so we can hear what's being said?
They can be taken out, it's just you're going to have to put them back in. I mean, if people want to, they can. Okay, sure. Okay, so does anyone have any questions on this issue of climate change, environment? This lady here. Oh, sorry, we're going to take questions on climate change and environment. Lady over there, please. If you just wait for the mic, sorry.
Hi there. The answers from the Liberal Democrat candidate Sarah and Florence for Labour were very focused on, and obviously it's good to focus at a community level, but what the party's plans are for the wider impact of climate change. We need to take very immediate action and what their parties would be able to do for us on a wider level in the future.
Particularly, I'm going to add to that, particularly about COP26, the big climate change talks which are coming next year to this country and are crucial.
Okay, so we've got 2 points there. Does anyone else want to add anything before I go back? No? Okay, sure. This gentleman here.
And you mentioned a lot about public transport and individual use cars, but how about logistic transport? How about those bringing goods and services into the capital and those thorough roads that they use there, more than just the individual uses of transport?
So we've got 3 questions there. One about national policy, we've got goods and freight, and we've got the conference next year. So if I go to Jackie first, and then we'll come around.
So do I answer this question in reference
So
to the original?
if you answer the question, the original question, and include 3 points, that's
Okay.
great.
Right, now I can stand up. Okay. So the original question was whether I adhered to the current policy of 2050, and I don't, because I think that's too late. We have 11 years until we reach a significant tipping point, after which we will not be able to mitigate our climate effects. Obviously, this means that we have to be consistent in our policies according to when we reach net zero in the UK. And so that's why the Green Party policy of 2030 is adhering to the science that tells us when to make this happen. So we need to do that across all platforms, and we need to be so consistent to make sure that we do not allow in certain things because it's difficult to change. So we need to think about how to make these proper changes, such as introducing a carbon tax, and that carbon tax will go across all things, including aviation fuel. We'll introduce a frequent flyers tax to make sure that the 15% of people who take 70% of the flights are proportionately taxed. We'll ban all the sales of diesel and petrol cars by 2030. And there's another thing which is offsetting, and 700 million trees are needed in the next 10 years to make this change happen, so that not only we're reducing our emissions, but we're also taking them out. Now, there's more things that are obviously completely necessary. We need to have a complete ban on fracking, but also all unconventional sources of oil and gas drilling. All of these things need to be completely unrolled out, and we need to have a radical change in how we approach the economy. We need to think about things like a circular economy, where we do not allow goods to be deliberately made to be obsolete in a few years. We need to make sure that all of the places that are selling these goods have a guarantee, and so we will encourage a repair service rather than a throwaway type of economy. And the same thing goes for our homes. We need to make sure our homes are retrofitted, and if any new homes are built, they're built according to the zero carbon sort of manufacturing process and building process. In terms of all of our transport, we need to think about how to best serve our environment. And the climate crisis also deals with the ecological crisis too. So we do not need things like HS2, but we need to think about ways in which we do not have to destroy 110 ancient woodlands in this country, and which will actually have a time of 120 years to become net zero. We need to think about electrifying our rail systems, increasing accessibility to all places across the country so that no one is left out, and we do not have such a centralised economy around London and nowhere else. In terms of COP26, I hope COP25 this year in Madrid will go some way in order to make these agreements unilateral across the planet, because we can't do these things alone. And the fact that we are thinking of after Brexit, of if it even happens, of having a deal with Trump, where we have issues around trade deals that will completely ruin our chances of achieving our net zeros, because Donald Trump is refusing to go according to the Paris Accord of the other COP conference, then we will lose our ambitions to do this and will become meaningless. So we need to stay in the EU, we need to increase our stringency according to stricter policies for the environment, and we need to be consistent across all platforms, and that needs to start now.
So if we go to Andrew now, and then if any of the others want to comment further, then we can. So if you deal with the original question around commitment, and then the additional questions about freight, about the conference, and about your national policy around climate change.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? Is this working? Yeah, okay. So Charles's question was about the abandonment of the net zero. Say what? What's happening?
right if I just hold it closer to your mouth.
It is working, but I'm using it wrong.
Hold it closer to your mouth.
Okay. I'm not a rock star like that. It's my first time. Well, I have to disagree with the vicar. Carbon dioxide is not a problem. It's 0.04% of the atmosphere. We had this discussion at XR Lambeth last week, and I put a bunch of videos on YouTube saying that this is not a problem, it's a bunch of alarmism about carbon dioxide. And in the week, and it is a week that that's been up, with XR Lambeth fully tagged, not a single climate activist, not a single person has got onto YouTube to tell me I've got any of that wrong. And I was telling the climate activists that the Holocene has been running for 11,650 years. I told the climate activists at XR Lambeth that the hottest point in the Holocene was 8,000 years ago, not 8 years ago, 8,000 years ago, when humans didn't have aeroplanes or cars. And I also made a point about language, which I know has got through to some of my candidates, because we are talking about carbon dioxide and not carbon, which are two totally different things. And when we're talking about net zero, whether it's by 2030 as the Greens want, or whether it's by 2050, we are talking about net zero emissions of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide isn't the problem. If it is a problem, and I don't agree that it is, the Green candidate was talking about how the Americans aren't going along with this, the Chinese are not going along with this, the Indians are not going along with it, even the Canadians are not going along with this stuff now. So, do you want your society to engage in a masochistic exercise to reduce carbon dioxide to zero? But it's not going to make any difference anyway, when the three biggest emitters of carbon dioxide, the United States, China and India, couldn't care less. They're not doing a single thing about it. The different point and the good point, the valid point, which does make a difference to everybody, is about the environment. It's about having good ecological practices. It's about getting as much stuff moving around, as many electric vehicles as possible in the long term. Air quality, of course, is a basic point, and it's a central point in the city. Of course it is. The big policy which the Brexit Party has, which is a great policy, is that we are completely against the exportation of rubbish. If you Google the term garbage dumping, if you Google the term global waste trade, that's what I'm talking about, where rich countries are exporting their waste to poor countries who need foreign currency. We're buying licenses to dump our rubbish in the developing world because they want our money and we want to get rid of our rubbish without thinking about it. And then, in the next breath, we'll say, oh, these countries in Southeast Asia are the biggest polluters. Well, guess what? That's because they buy, they're taking money from us to take our rubbish.
I can ask you to wrap up, please.
Yeah, I'm very suggestible. I'll wrap up. Thank you.
Before I go on to the next question, do any of the candidates want to say anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on your point in terms of freight. And again, for this part of the constituency, it's really important that all the businesses are well serviced and they can receive the goods. But the reality is congestion in London continues to grow. One of the only ways we can deal with that is getting more people out of cars, people who don't need to be in cars, using public transport. Transport for London are committed to seeing 80% of journeys by public transport by 2041. And that will only happen if we have an integrated and connected transport system that's affordable for all. So that means increasing cycling provision, which again, in this part of the constituency, some of those junctions are really unsafe. As a cyclist, it's almost, Russian roulette with your life. We need to get the cars respecting that, we want more people cycling. For the businesses, it's about creating shared depots so that you can all have a space to store your goods. Instead of you all driving day in, day out, doing different services, how about you sharing that? That would reduce cost as well. So there are creative ways that we need to look at that. In terms of Labour's policies nationally, one of the things we want to do is create a green industrial revolution, and that means by getting workers to help lead this change that we need to see. So workers working in the building development, workers working to build some of those electric vehicles we want to see on the UK streets. A number of people aren't switching to electric vehicles because it's still quite expensive. It's still a small majority of manufacturers that make them. We need to make sure we drive investment and production in those areas so that those vehicles can be cheaper for everybody to use.
You know, I think fundamentally this is a question of systems that promote short-termism and competition over long-termism and collaboration. And so when it comes to our political system isn't helping us fight climate change. That's why I'm an electoral reform campaigner. I think we've got to move away from first past the post in order to have collaborative ways of governing that allow us to look beyond these crazy short-term cycles. And when we look at our financial services, all that does is incentivise short-term projects. Short-term funding for short-term projects. I spent some time working with Paul Pullman, who's the former CEO of Unilever, and he was desperately trying to make the business the best that it could be by moving beyond quarterly reporting cycles. Now, fundamentally, he lost his job. Why? Because the investors weren't happy. They weren't happy with that long-term view that he had. So we've got to fundamentally change our financial system as well. Otherwise, all of these small changes, it will just be incremental. We've got to change the money. The money drives everything, and as much as the money's driving short-termist projects, we are never going to be able to take on long-term challenges like climate change. So, as the MP for Vauxhall, I would prioritise pushing on that financial services system and making sure that, for example, pension fund managers are not able to make short-term decisions when it comes to the environment.
So we'll go to the next question now. Do we have Jenny here? I'd like to ask you a question, please.
Why do you think it's important that the local resident views are given more weight in planning decisions? How could you help with this?
So let's Jacqueline first.
So the Green Party policy, which involves a lot of devolution of power to local authorities, is to the weight of £10 billion a year to local authorities, with an extra £3 billion given to a climate emergency fund. Because we don't think that the best ways of dealing with things are through a centralised system, but actually giving power to the local people to make the best decisions in their particular boroughs. So this involves not just about climate, but the 10 billion will also be to take in schools that have been previously turned into academies and making them more about local authority schools, so that costs and investment can be given to places that need them the most. Everything that we do right now involves this top-down control and takes money away from where we can make changes in our communities. And we've seen things like initiatives and charities actually have their budgets taken away because they don't have enough investment compared to what they used to. So in order to make society a better place, we need to actually say to the people that are living in them that you have control over how to make your decisions in your community, and we'll have much stronger ways of dealing with things and make much more radical improvements from there. Thank you.
Local planning is so complex, and I think the whole system needs to change and needs a big rethink. One of the things that I've done in my role is firstly as the councillor in Lambeth, and I've sat on a few planning committees, including one for a site in this part of the borough which up until now still hasn't been redeveloped. Some of you may remember a site called Doon Street. I'm sure James will remember that. And when I sat on that application as a councillor, I objected to it because I didn't feel that there was enough social housing within the proposal. In terms of other local applications, again, as the chair of the Transport Committee, I opposed Transport for London's application to open a second entrance at Southwark Tube Station because that would have a detrimental impact on residents who've lived there, who make that place their home. So it's about making sure we are valid and we are voicing residents' local concerns at the planning committee. The way planning currently works is that a number of councillors who sit on that is a quasi-judicial committee. So obviously, it's not about how many objections they receive. They have to go through that planning process as it stands. So one of the things that I would want to do as the MP, if I'm elected, is making sure that we have a full rethink on how we change our planning system. We also need to look at how we make sure that when developers are consulted, it's genuine consultation, not a leaflet through the post and then no one then turns up to those consultation meetings. So I've been working with a group of residents around Albert Embankment around a proposal to redevelop the old fire station. And some residents and organisations claim that they've never been involved, but in the statement of community involvement, the developers are saying that they have. That shouldn't be happening. So making sure meaningful consultation, tracking some of those changes, when residents and the council are asking for information, whether it's around daylight, sunlight, that information comes through to them. But ultimately, it's about making sure we change the planning regime as it stands. So it's not favouring developers, but actually making sure local residents, who will have to continue to live here when those developers go up, have a real say.
Before I go to the other candidates, I just wanted to ask, there is a lady here, possibly here, Vauxhall, if you'd like to ask, links to planning, so if you'd like to ask your question as well, and then I'll go to the others.
Thank you. Very much a linked question, in fact, but specifically in North Lambeth and Kennington, we're seeing developers using the precedent of towers within the opportunity areas to propose them in the areas of local character, and particularly affected our 1930s LCC estates. So a particular planning application there that Florence, you referenced, 8 Albert Embankment. It goes to planning committee tomorrow with a loss of daylight to local social housing at 40%. My question was about how you would represent the Lambeth tenants and residents. I think to some extent that is covered by the previous question, so I'd like to add something very specific. With respect to 8 Albert Embankment, will you commit to asking the Secretary of State to issue an Article 14 direction to force through a public inquiry?
So I'll go to Sarah now, and then I'll come to the others, and I'll come back to you about that commitment.
I talked a little bit earlier about the neighbourhood plan that's come together here and that's taken years to get to this point. Most parts of our borough haven't got anywhere near where Waterloo and South Bank have got to in terms of their neighbourhood planning. Now there is this plan that's been passed through referendum by local people, local businesses alike. What is the point of all of that work, all of that thought from people who live and breathe this place? What's the point of it if that plan doesn't mean anything when it really comes down to it? And I think I've seen time after time after time, residents put forward alternative plans, new ideas. There's fantastic ideas in this neighbourhood plan. And I talked a little bit about estate demolition earlier. The residents at Cressingham Gardens, when faced with the demolition of their homes, they put forward their own plan. They had help, and they said, here's a way that we can solve for getting more homes that local people can afford, in a way that means that we do not need to lose ours. So there is power in this community, in what people know. And I'm amazed at how much energy we frankly waste relying on the goodwill of local people, time after time, to oppose things that don't meet the needs of our local community. I've been involved with the Stop the Blocks as one example, the proposed development on former NHS land of Renfrew Road. I think it's absolutely scandalous that City Hall has given £1 million grant to that developer before planning permission was even sought for studio flats that will frankly cost more than £1 million that no local people can afford. I mean, as everyone here is saying, the planning system is really broken from top to bottom, but up till now, the onus has been on local residents to push and push and push tirelessly to make things better. So this has all got to change, and actually I don't think it's just our planning, that the national planning framework that needs to change. I actually think it's our whole conception of what it really means to live a happy and healthy life for everyone in our city. We've talked about economic opportunity zones, so that's the idea that people work over here, you know, let's build all the jobs over here. And then urban villages is what they call the places where we're all supposed to live. Let's all live in an urban village over there. And then let's have a cultural zone over here. That's just not how London has developed. It's developed in a network way, organically, where we live, work and play together. And I don't think this zonal approach is what any of us think the future of a good life looks like. So we need to change the system from the bottom, from the top down to the bottom. And in terms of supporting residents, number one, I will be by your side in championing what you think is best for you. Number two, I will make sure that we hold Lambeth Council and the GLA to account, because what's the point in having a local plan if you don't see it through? And that's the case of the example that you're talking about in the former fire service building. And thirdly, we've got to use our parliamentary powers to change the system. So those are the three things that I would do. And in response to your specific question, absolutely happy to send the letter, but I believe the planning committee is tomorrow, so that might be a job for coffee at breakfast. Thank you.
No, you're absolutely right. Planning reform is absolutely essential. It does take far too long for a, sort of an application to go through and to reach its climax when you actually have the buildings being developed. So no, for a starter, we definitely have to make sure we are changing this. It's also about having a better relationship with developers, and it's also about them working with the council and the council working with them better. There needs to be greater transparency. There is a case where, absolutely, at the moment, sort of applications get advertised and people aren't necessarily engaging with it. So that's where we've got to use technology in the future, having apps, for example, which allow you to see the details of the planning application so you can get more involved, so you can actually have your say on this, because I think that is a problem in terms of lacking engagement. We also have to look to the actual council itself. This is a Labour-run council in this area, and I think if we're going to actually have any dramatic changes, we need to have a more balance so that we actually hold this council accountable for when it's on its different committees, because when it is, as it is 56 Labour councillors, I don't see how that, and six Green and then 1 Conservative, how that is actually going to be giving a fair view about what everyone wants across this area. So I think it's going to be a combination. Yes, we're going to have to use the government to make planning reforms, but then we're going to have to really look locally and see what we can do to try and improve here. Thank you.
Before I come to Andrew, I'm just going to take a few questions on this, so if anyone wants to add anything around planning. Anyone have any questions? If they want any commitments made by the candidates, they can ask now on planning. No? Okay. Andrew.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to zoom out here. Look, the United Kingdom is one big island with 67 million people on it, and that's about the same population as France, for example. They have a lot more space out there, and there's a direct tension between liberalising planning and the idea that local residents have the right to, in effect, veto projects. No, we don't like it. So we have to make a decision. If local residents have greater power, then of course that will slow down the planning process. Some of these candidates have said inconsistent things, in the sense that they'll say they're all in favour of liberalisation of planning or reform of planning, and then they'll say, but of course the residents get to have their say. No, it doesn't really work like that. It can't be both. The numbers are pretty big. We spend 25 billion a year on housing benefit. For the same money, 25 bill, we could build a lot of houses. I've got a specific number on that, on the basis that the government can build a house for about £100,000. So that housing benefit budget of 25 bill a year, you could actually build 250,000 homes for that same money. The figure of 25 billion a year is based on 5 million households receiving an average of £5,000 a year in housing benefit. The numbers are big, and if you're not building new houses, then there will always be that 5 million families receiving housing benefit. You know, something has to be done about it, and the money has to be spent in a better way. And as part of that process, central government, the Lib Dem candidate was talking about long-term decisions and about how money works, about how people borrow money. The long-term decisions to put billions into property has to be made by central government. And when central government does that, central government is going to make the decisions. And that's just how it has to be. And we're never going to deal with the fact that we have 5 million families having housing benefit any other way.
Before we move on to the next question, so I'm just going to ask the candidates each just to give me 2 to 3 changes that they would make to the planning system, including yourself, Andrew, if you believe that changes should be made. So I'll start with Sarah.
So as we said, I think what we've got to do is the speed at which applications go through. So that is one of the things we've got to make sure that it is quicker through the process so that decisions can be made faster. I think, as I said, it's the accountability part in the sense of the visibility of the planning applications as well, so the details. So we've got to make it more visible and more engaged for everyone. And I think just generally, I think it's going to have to be a relationship between the government and local authorities in terms of where we are placing developments. We've got to think more about where we can use vacant spaces, especially in London particularly. There is a lot of shops, spaces above shops that are potentially vacant, and what we've got to do is work out new strategies, so that we can actually utilise that vacant space. So it will be a combination of working on those areas.
And just specifically, I just want to ask, in terms of ensuring that residents have a greater voice or greater influence on planning, what would be your party?
Well, I think it's things like the South Banks, your residents group here. I think it's having more of these community groups is going to be a big way of making sure that there are more active voices. I think the problem with, especially with London, is everyone is very busy, and sometimes they don't always feel that they can get to meetings, or they don't feel engaged, or that they can be involved. And actually, it's making it much more visible, having these groups, so that they can get involved, making it much more public knowledge about how you get involved. And that's why I say I want to use technology, because we all have our phones and we're all able to quickly access information. So if we can actually channel apps and things like that, that's the way that we're going to help with the younger generation, getting them more involved.
If I go to you, Andrew, now?
Thank you. The Brexit Party is full of property developers, it's full of capitalists. We're not ashamed of that either. I'm a lawyer, I've been a corporate lawyer, High Court lawyer for 30 years. And look, we guys, we even understand economics, we even understand how money works, and we even understand what decisions have to be made by government and what can or should be left to the private sector. We're not hardcore free marketeers. It's a ridiculous idea even that the free market exists in anything at all, and it's certainly a ridiculous idea that the free market can solve any problems. I don't think that's ever been known to happen in the history of modern economics. We have policies, you know, at the Brexit Party we have specific policies. We say brownfield sites, for God's sake, just get on with it and build something. It's a brownfield. What are we doing? Just build on it. Get on with it. So we favour an accelerated planning procedure when it comes to brownfields. You know, I really don't approve of the idea that the activist resident can stop things. Stuff needs to happen, and nobody wants stuff built in their backyard. Nobody wants to lose light, you know. Nobody wants that, and that will always stop anything from happening if that's the determining factor. The other big idea which the Brexit Party has, as part of making a lot of real money available for building and housing, is that local councils should be able to go directly to central government and get money to build. Central government doesn't want the job of micromanaging big chunks of housing here and there. But if councils, local authorities want to do it, that's fine, and it's our explicit policy to go straight to central government and get that money. Now, where the residents come into it there, because I'm not saying local residents shouldn't have a point of view, if you want to vote for councillors who want to expand, it doesn't apply in London at all, but in the rest of the world, in the rest of the UK, people can vote for councillors who want to expand their area, who want to bring in population, and certain places will want to vote for local authorities who don't want to do that. But then, having made that decision, they'll get a local authority which either doesn't bother, or one which aggressively goes after central spending for housing. So those are our specific ideas on the subject.
So just on that point though, about having resident influence, I know you mentioned it briefly, but how would you ensure, not on housing just specifically, but in general, how would you ensure that their views are being considered so that developments are reflecting their needs?
There are two completely different classes of development here. There's the private development, there's the private money building private projects, and I can tell you almost everything in London is private money building private projects, okay? Now, in those circumstances, there is already in the planning procedure quite an extensive structure for people to make their opinions known. I'm not speaking against that. Go for it, say what you need to say. There's a big difference when it comes to public projects. Broadly speaking, when public authorities, be it the government or local authorities, when they want to build something, they will build it. You know, good luck. If you don't want that motorway, good luck. If you don't want that new train station, they aren't going to build it. So let us please understand that there is a distinction between private projects and public projects. And when it comes to private projects, of course, you get to say what you like, and it does go into the mix. There's no question that it goes into the mix. As Florence said, these committees have a quasi-judicial function, they're subject to judicial review. You can be sure that they're listening to what people are saying. They have to.
If I can ask you to wrap up.
Yeah, and I've been asked to wrap up, so there it is.
Thank you very much. I was just going to say, if I go to Sarah first. Sarah first, please.
So the first thing that I would do is to change the way the national planning framework works so that it's not a checklist, but it's actually a vision for what it means to live a good life. And that includes how we think about our public land. So right now, if we want to preserve, for example, our parks, our green open spaces, we need to look at things like fields and trust to make sure that bits aren't carved off the side of it, slowly but surely. If we want to make sure that we have true public space where anyone can be, not privately owned public space, then we have to fight and fight and fight through the planning system. So I think fundamentally we need to change the way that that national framework looks holistically about what a good life is, and in particular what our public land is for. The second thing that I would do is to change the way that planning and licensing works. So right now, they are managed separately and they pull in different directions. Our planning makes everyone kind of go closer together, like we're going to like infill, infill, infill. Whereas our licensing pushes everyone further apart. So we're going back to, we work over here, live over here, play over here. And that's hugely problematic. Partly because of the timescales for moving any kind of growth and development forward. But actually for me, the thing I really care about is holding on to our nightlife. And when I say our nightlife, I mean our local pubs. I mean the places where we get to hear local talent, local musical talent play. I mean the nightclubs that we really value, like our LGBT venues that are so important here in Vauxhall. All of those things are under threat because of this push and pull between planning and licensing. So we need to get those departments working closely together. There are a couple of things that have been done in this area. For example, the principle of agent of change has been brought in, which basically means that whoever's new, the new kid on the block, whether that's a new hotel or whether it's a new block of flats or a new nightclub, that they are responsible. They are responsible for making sure that the thing that was originally there is maintained and respected. It's a great principle, it's not implemented. So there's a lot we can do in planning and licensing that really preserves not just our public space, as I talked about before, but our community infrastructure that goes beyond that. And then I think the third thing that would be my priority is transparency. It's all very well us talking about residents having a voice, but for anyone in this room who has tried to get hold of information about where the agenda was made and by whom and what was on it, the minutes of that meeting, where the money came from, who put up the money in the first place, whether meetings happened before the meeting happened, it's mind-blowingly complicated and incredibly opaque. And that makes it really, really difficult for any of us to contribute and for our needs, our unique needs, to be heard. So I think transparency is crucial. We should have completely different expectations of radical transparency right the way through our system, right the way through from national government to City Hall to our local council. So number 1, change the framework. Number 2, planning and licensing. And number 3, radical transparency.
So the most important thing, is this working? The most important thing that planning has to consider is the existing residents. So every single time there needs to be a planning application, there needs to be a thought about every single resident, not just for the ones who are going to be moved out or the ones who are directly next to it, but for every person who will be able to even see that building or have to go past it and have the pollution that will be exhausted by the building process that will affect their lives. So we need to have things like ballots unrolled for all of the residents in that community as a compulsory way, not just as a second part of the process, but before the process has even started. And we need to prioritise the views of those that are the most vulnerable in the community. Right now, I live right next to the Portuguese community in Vauxhall, where I see all of the 9 Elms places go up onto the left of me, and I see most of those flats are completely empty. And those places have created a ghost town where there was no need to have those. We need more social homes, and they're all private developments. What we need to do is change the taxation system. So we increase land value tax to stop these people buying places and creating developments where you encourage the use of empty and vacated flats just so you can see the rise in your property go up, whilst we see over 23,000 people on a register for social housing as a need in Lambeth. So we need to rethink our taxation system. We need to rethink how we acknowledge the needs of the residents in the community and prioritise social housing over private housing immediately. Thank you.
Thank you. I think a number of the candidates have highlighted some of the points. In terms of the framework that we have at the moment, we need to drill deep on what we mean by statutory consultation, which a number of private developers hide behind. So it's meaningful consultation with the local residents. And one of the things that was introduced in the London Plan, which is a documentation for strategic planning framework across London by the Mayor, is any new estate regeneration development will have to have a ballot of residents going forward, and I fully support that. And that was brought in cross-party by the Assembly. I think the other thing that we need to look at is Jacqueline mentioned it there in terms of issue of land banking. A number of developers speculate about a certain area, then they'll buy a piece of land because they've got the money. And we don't know where that funding is coming from. It comes as far as Canadian pension investors, money from the UAE. It's about saying, actually, if you're buying land in the UK, hoping to sit on it and not developing on it, we should give the local councils a compulsory purchase order to purchase that land and build new developments, social developments for local residents. Another key area that I'd want to see change is the whole issue around judicial review and challenges. We've seen an example here locally with Lambeth Council and residents opposing a scheme locally that went to planning, a big scheme, and then just for the government inspectorate to then dismiss that, Graphite Square. So we need to say, if you really want local residents involved in the planning process and working with the council, you need to devolve the powers down to the council. So greater devolution so that the councils can actually work with the local residents to address some of those issues coming forward.
So we'll go to the next question now. Is Marie here? Marie Claude? I'll ask the question. Essentially, Over the last few years, we have seen a rapid decline in local, everyday independent shops. There is now no affordable butcher or fishmonger or any kind within 20 minutes walk of where I live. We've also seen a reduction in useful shops along Lower Market and its vicinity in favour of coffee shops, takeaways and restaurants. So if the candidates were elected, what will they do to support a balanced mix of independent local businesses in the constituency? If I could ask Andrew first.
Well, I think this is a real easy one. Oh, sorry, I mean my microphone. Look, this is a real easy one. If people want to have small local shops, they need a council which will ban supermarkets. It's simple, just get rid of supermarkets and then there will be small shops. But if you have supermarkets, then the supermarkets will crowd out the small shops. So it's simply a case of what people choose to do. Outside of London, it happens in the same way, where high streets decline. That's because people prefer to drive out of town to retail parks, and all of the action is in the retail parks. In the end, it's great to be nostalgic about small shops or say, oh, the butcher's gone and it's a coffee shop, but in the end, this is an example of market forces at work at street level, because people who run shops are looking to make money and they're not going to put a shop there if they're not going to get any business. So it's really your choice. Are the people who say, oh, we want more small shops, look at your own actions. You never go to the supermarket. Where do you do your big shop? And it's about time. It's about time in London. Nobody has time to go around 5 or 6 different shops. They've got 10 minutes to go in the supermarket. So I think it's a nostalgic and it's a rather pointless question, because that's not how we live.
If we go to Florence, please.
For the small businesses who want to open in Lambeth, I'm saying you're welcome, because you employ our local people. A number of small businesses in this part of the borough, even though they're struggling with things like business rates, they continue to pay the living wage. If they can do it, why can't some of the big corporations do it as well? We need to make sure we're supporting those small businesses. This Saturday is Small Business Saturday, and I'm going to be supporting a number of those businesses. I touched earlier about public transport. The power of the green pound. If people have good public transport, they will come and use those shops around their area, instead of thinking about, I'm going to do the big shop at an out of borough supermarket or a big chain. So it's about supporting those businesses. I think there's a big issue around property prices as well. A number of those small businesses struggle with the rent. So we need to look at creative ways of supporting some of those smaller spaces and getting a mixture of shops in and looking at how we can really support them. I think the other area is definitely around, we need to have a discussion about business rates. And this is the big elephant in the room that has often been fudged for many years. The big businesses can pay that, and the amount of business rates generated in this part of the borough then spread out to the rest of the borough. We need to make sure some of those business rates are kept in this part of the borough to help those small businesses who are struggling. I did oppose that as the Assembly member for Lambeth and Southwark. I didn't. There's a public letter showing that I'm not a Labour councillor in Southwark. The GLA does not have the planning powers to approve the application. It's the councillors on Southwark Council that approve that. The GLA does not support. The GLA, we're not making the decision on that.
When we come to high street reform, it is basically, we have to encourage these small businesses, and I think all of us in this room, if we can start to see them more there, then we definitely want to support them. But the way that we do that is by helping to keep corporation tax low, so that they can invest the money in growing and also being able to employ more people, and also therefore expand around that. But it's also encouraging them as well with business rates. It is far too high, and that definitely has to come down, and that is a priority of the Conservative government, if we're selected with the majority coming forward, is that we've got to do that to tackle it, to make it easier for them to run these businesses. But a part of this all is about creating a sense of community. So we've got to have these sort of pop-up shops combined with other areas to make it sort of a hub as to why you want to come there. We've also got to encourage more housing around these sort of areas so that you have the natural footfall to come into these businesses. So it's all about now, I think the vision actually is with our planning system, the way that we do want this going forward, is to make this a much more vibrant area so that everyone is there and doesn't want to necessarily have to go out to the major stores, because I think there is that public support. So it's going to have to be just a combination of us all, and we have to ourselves take the duty to go into those pop-up shops and to support them and to give every support to our small businesses.
So before we go to Jacqueline and the other side, Sarah Lewis, does anyone want to add any questions, any comments? Yeah, gentlemen at the front, please. On this specific question.
Talking about housing, why don't you open more clubs for vulnerable people? Why don't you let the rent be low for clubs where vulnerable people can meet, instead of being in the house all alone?
Okay, that's one question. Anybody else? This gentleman?
I just wondered if any of you would be in favour of lowering the tax on beer and making the price of a drink in a pub. I mean, if we're talking about local businesses, making the price of a drink in a pub lower, so it encourages more people to go to a pub and create that as a community area.
Anyone else? Okay, great. So we'll go to Jacqueline, please.
I've got a lot of points, so I'll keep my paper here. So, first of all, the decline of local shops has been led by the rise of giant shops like Sainsbury's and Tesco's. And as the Green Party, I think it's pretty clear that Sainsbury's is one of the largest plastic polluters in the entire country, and I'm sure the other supermarkets aren't far behind. So increasing the amount of local shops, as well as the amount of local produce that's made within the local area, actually doesn't just help the community and the local economy, but it also helps the environment. And what we need to do is we need to see how these companies are allowed to thrive. They're not paying high enough tax at the highest rates. You need to increase these giant conglomerates and huge businesses and tax them at a higher rates than the local businesses can be. As well as this, we need to impose a plastic tax and see how these larger shops are actually polluting a lot larger than the local shops have to. So we need to think about ways in which to mitigate their effects. As well as this, we need to subsidise local agriculture and make sure that the local places are not having to pay more in order to have better quality meat, better quality farms, and can afford to make their produce and sell it at a competitive price compared to the supermarkets. We need to change the ways in which we tax, and so we need to get rid of national insurance. We need to incorporate it into a larger corporation tax, but that has a higher minimum, so that those who are suffering from disastrous tax rates from their lower incomes and lower profit margins, they won't suffer, but will change the top end of those companies. So we need to think about this from a tactical point of view, but also in a way that we also think about subsidies. Thank you.
Do you want to just answer the question from and about the beers?
Right, okay, so I also think, so the community centres idea is actually great, because then you actually see that with the growth of large jobs, with jobs in the community, you can actually create a hub of people knowing each other and supporting each other, who actually can give the jobs within the community to one another. So you're not just increasing knowledge and awareness of the area, but you're also increasing the amount of people that can benefit and profit within a local economy stream. And such has been done with things like Transition Town, who introduced the bricks and pound. You change the structure of the local economy when you bring communities together. And I think in the terms of your tax on beer, I think if you are able to create subsidies for locally produced products, something like Tiger beer, which is flown in from Japan, shouldn't be the same price as something that's been made within 5 miles. And that would be a great way of incentivizing local produce and local agriculture, local food economy. Thank you.
So it feels to me as though the thing that kind of joins the dots between all these questions is the big question of how do we build a sustainable, in every sense, community? How do we build and keep and maintain a sustainable community for us all? So you mentioned places that vulnerable people can come together. Actually, I thought that was one of the really interesting ideas in the local plan that was raised about following the lead of a borough like Westminster that has actually made that a priority to build and maintain safe spaces for people with specific needs to be together, because everyone needs places to be together. And so to your question about taxes on alcohol, actually for most pubs it's not the price of beer that's actually stopping them from being open. It's the planning and licensing challenges that we talked about earlier, and it's the business rates. And you know, when it comes, I'll come back to your question on beer in a second, but when it comes to business rates, what I would do as the MP for Vauxhall is to get rid of business rates entirely. They are making it very, very, very difficult for us to have mixed community in the way that we all seem to agree we want and need. And so we'd get rid of business rates, and we'd instead put the burden onto the landowner with a commercial landowner levy. Now this is a little bit complicated, because clearly what we don't want to happen is for that cost to be transferred directly onto the tenants, the tenant occupiers. So it needs to be done in a way that means that the burden for payment lies with the people who own the land, and then the occupiers are able to run their businesses, whatever they may be, whether it's a shop selling locally produced food, or whether it's somewhere that's a place for people to come and drink together. But I think you also raised the question of like, what role does business play? My colleague here may be right in saying that the high street may not look the same 5 years from now as how it looked 20 years ago, but business plays a role no matter what. It creates jobs, it provides really important educational opportunities for our young people before they even go into work. The training, the skill building, the coming together, the learning how to show up. That's really important for us here. And businesses also drive innovation, including alternatives to alcohol-based products. So I think we need a mixed community. We need a mixed community where we can work, live and play together. Business plays a role, community centres play a role. Business rates aren't working. So as your MP, I would prioritise finding ways to keep that mixed community and to make it sustainable.
So before I move on to just questions from the floor, if anyone wants to ask other questions, I'm just going to ask Andrew, Florence and Sarah just to comment on the 2 additional questions. You can be very brief. Yeah. Do you want to reduce the price of beer?
I mean, as far as clubs are concerned, I would have thought that was a local authority thing, and all that national candidates can say is, yeah, it's a good idea. But I'm not sure it's a in that case, everything is a national issue then, isn't it? And you may as well not bother with any local authorities. This chap, I don't know if I found the one guy who's going to vote for me. So, the only okay, fair enough. I'll ask and answer. I'm not going to change your mind either, but I'm not going to try to, but the Brexit Party is the only party with a libertarian edge to it. We don't have a specific policy on beer. We're not going to say, free beer, vote for us. One thing I have noticed, and we were all at the XR Lambeth event, just checking my diary, I think it was last Tuesday, And we left, and we were looking for a pub. And there was a pub right round the corner, which was closed. Then we walked towards Kennington Tube. There's another pub sort of diagonally across from Kennington Tube. It's closed. We're here in the centre of London. It's like 9 o'clock, and the pubs are closed. I'm trying to remember the name. It's actually Lambeth Road. There's a pub on Lambeth Road, but guess what? It isn't a pub. It's closed. So it seems all of the 3 pubs I've come across in Vauxhall, they're all closed. Now I haven't looked into this. I don't know what the answer is, but there has to be a problem where in central London, just across the river, the pubs are closed. What on earth is going on here? I don't know. I would have thought, what's the answer? What is it?
There are loads here, looking at all that.
What's he saying?
There's loads of pubs that you're just looking in the wrong place. That was very
I just really lucky to come across the three pubs which are closed. But it does indicate that there is something about business rates. It should be possible to operate a business without incurring business rates which are so high you can't do it. I have to say it's completely inconsistent to make an argument for higher corporation tax for big companies and lower business rates for small companies, because guess what? Companies all, they pay the same rates of corporation tax. And if you really had a system where big companies paid more corporation tax, all they would do would be to subdivide themselves into a bunch of small companies to pay the lower rate of tax. So there you go. Who's next?
I've got a confession to make. I don't drink beer. I think you've raised a valid point, but as some of my colleagues have mentioned, it's not the price of the beer that's causing a number of pubs to close. It's a case of all the different things they're having to compete with in terms of rates and rent. So it's about making sure how do we protect some of those pubs as assets of community value, which is a planning regime that can help protect some venues. I think in the point that you raised, it goes back to the fact that over the last coming up to 10 years now, the consistent cuts to not just local government funding, but a number of public organisations has forced a number of places that people used to enjoy close. They haven't had the funding from central government, and they are being left to actually continue to provide services for local people. We're seeing the population in this borough grow. As with the rest of London, our population continues to grow. The challenges continues to grow. But that austerity, first introduced by the coalition government of the Tories and Lib Dems and now the Conservatives, people are at breaking point. We need to look at how we reverse some of those cuts and fund the services, including day centres, including the youth clubs that have closed in this borough, including the police stations that have closed in this borough, so that people can have those public services when they need them.
Yes, sir. To address your question on pubs, it's one of the things that the Conservative Party is actually very much trying to support in terms of there's going to be business rates retail discount, which is up to 50% reduction on taxes for small businesses, including for pubs and cinemas, because that is one of the things we've seen is that, I know there's quite a few pubs around here, but pubs generally do suffer and they do find it very hard to operate. So that is one of the things that we're going to be trying to introduce, because we really do want to support these sort of community institutions. It should be a place that you can go, anyone can go and have a chat and meet. So that is something the Conservatives are very much committed to trying and helping there. And then when we come to the community centres, it is absolutely vital that you have somewhere to go and that communities come together. I sort of volunteer with a charity where we do lunches for the over 50s so that they can come together and they don't feel loneliness. And that is just done on a voluntary basis, but we need to be finding more spaces and we do need to encourage that. And yes, there have been cuts, and Florence has mentioned that, but this is now changing. We have got our financial position, we are much stronger now with our financial position. We had to make some very hard decisions over the last 9 years from the amounts that the Labour government had spent recklessly with its borrowing. We are now in a position where we can start to invest, and that is what we're going to be doing, putting it into the front line, putting it into communities, so that we can really make a difference to you all.
So what we're going to do now is just open it up to any questions that people may have. It's a free-for-all, really. So if we go from this gentleman here first, please.
Hi, good evening. My question is really about public transport. We know transport is a sort of citizenship opportunity, but I think Lambeth and Vauxhall's had a raw deal. We have Department of Transport won't devolve suburban railway services to TfL. But on the other hand, TfL's been cutting bus services in this area. We have large swathes of stations which are not accessible. We have tube lines which are dangerously overcrowded. So my question, and it's sort of really a question of who has the devolutions, how accountable is the Department of Transport to Lambeth? How accountable is TfL to Lambeth and Vauxhall people? Because I think we've had that input into how services are being planned. We have Vauxhall bus station being reduced in London.
Would you say that you feel that...
So the question I want to put to the candidates is really this: how willing are you to really challenge, whether it's in Whitehall, whether it's in Town Hall, whether it's City Hall, so that we get those public transport improvements that we badly need to take people out of our cars and to actually protect access to jobs? Because currently, I think we're falling behind.
And this is a big issue as someone who uses public transport. I almost got into an argument with another mother once who refused to move her pushchair for a disabled resident. And I said, as a commuting mum in the morning with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, it's absolutely vital that you recognise that there are other residents who need to use public transport. And we can fold up our pushchair, but it's about making sure there are more buses. One of the things I did when Heidi Alexandra was confirmed as the new deputy mayor for transport, I brought her down to this area to do a walkabout because there are big changes proposed for Waterloo and the roundabout there. There are a number of buses that go through this area, and some of them, if you stand at any one time, can be stacked up from over the bridge right through. So one of the proposals that TfL had in the bus consultation and changes that you mentioned was about taking some of those buses out, but as the Assembly member, I opposed those changes because I saw that there were buses that residents rely on that would be cut. You can't expect people to keep changing 2-3 buses when TfL didn't take into account the distance that people are then having to walk for those changes. Some people may have mobility issues, you can't just assume that everyone can make those changes quickly. So it's about making sure we have an integrated transport system so that people can change from one mode to another to continue your journey via public transport. In terms of the Department for Transport, I'm so glad that Chris Grayling has gone as the former Transport Secretary, failing Grayling, because one of the things we've been consistently pushing for is a number of those suburban routes to be devolved down to Transport for London, including some of the routes that went through the former Transport Secretary's own constituency. How can you have train operators essentially cancel over 630 routes just like that? That's what happened during the chaos of the changed timetables over a year and a half ago. Those private contractors with Gobi Thameslink, because the way that contract was drawn up by the Department of Transport, they were not liable to the residents and commuters who were paying in excess of £3,000 for their annual travel cards. But yet they weren't getting that service, but they continue to make a profit. So it's about transparency and devolving some of those routes that go through London to Transport for London. And on that, there's been consistent support from a number of councils, including all political parties, to say that TfL should have those services. So I will definitely continue to push on those as your MP.
There's absolutely no doubt that there is massive complexity in terms of accountability and who we actually hold to account for which bit of our system. You have to be a total transport geek, really, to get into the weeds of who's got which bit of land that's related to which entrance and what's happened to that bus stop. But I think, fundamentally, we need to plan our transportation, yes, around the things that we need to do on the climate and the environment, absolutely fundamental. But we also need to plan it, not just in terms of the volume of flow and particular routes, but to respond to individual needs. Heaven forbid the person who wants to travel from west to east in our constituency, or from east to west to go to a job, It's very, very difficult. North to south rules, south to north rules. The individual needs around people with accessibility issues. You know, it may be that a certain bus route doesn't have as much usage as another bus route, but that might be the only way that that wheelchair user can get to the place that they need to go to. So I think we need to think really differently about how we prioritise our transportation so that we are responding to every individual need that there is and not just looking at, you know, where the majority need to go and in what way. In terms of standing up for the needs of this community, I have absolutely no reason whatsoever not to hold Lambeth Council to account, not to hold TfL to account, absolutely no reason not to hold City Hall to account, and no reason not to hold the Department of Transport to account. So yes, you can depend on me to do so.
Yeah, it's very important that we keep London moving, and we've got to do everything that we can to do that. As you said, it has to make sure it's environmentally friendly, but it also has to make sure that we can get to do our jobs, to be with our families, and everything that we need to do in there. As part of that, though, I think we also have to make sure that fares aren't prohibitive, because at the moment you start to see costs escalating year after year, and it means that people are being moved away from going into public transport because it's just too expensive. So we've got to tackle this head on, and that does involve with accountability, holding our institutions to account on that. So we've really got to hold their feet to the fire and make sure that people can travel, like having our rail cards, like our 16, 17-year-old rail card we want to have. You've just had the 26 to 30 rail card introduced as well. So I think fundamentally we do have to really, I would very happily hold any government or institution or any of those to account, because without that, what do you have? So we have to have a strong voice to make sure that we can keep London moving.
So what we need to do is we need to make sure that every single person is within 1 mile of an accessible station, and that means that every single person can access that station. What we also need to do is increase the frequency and length and the number of bus routes around into the entirety of London, as well as the entire country. So in order to do this, we need to put a huge amount of investment in to make sure that there's no one missed out. And so this will actually be an investment into our economy, because everyone will be able to access the things they need to do to get to their workplaces of work, to get to their families. And also, it will decrease the amount of pollution there is, which will be an investment to stop the amount of deaths due to pollution on our roads. What we don't need is more roads, and what we don't need is things like the Silvertown Tunnel, which just increase the amount and capacity of car traffic and private ownership traffic. We need to change these systems so that we prioritise and subsidise public transport, and we use an increased amount of carbon tax to tax fuels, so that we put the money back into the economy and reinvest it into local transport. As well as this, we need to think about what's actually going on in Vauxhall, and right now our bus station is under threat, as it's been signed off in order to make room for 2 giant tower blocks of 45 and 53 stories, or something like that's the nearest story. And what's happening now is not actually well known to most people in Vauxhall, and it needs to be stopped, because right now the plans to change that bus station are to make dotted bus stations around Vauxhall, and we'll lose that giant central hub where people use to go from place to place, from a rail station, a tube station and a bus station. It's absolutely essential. At this time we do not put in a large tower block, but we keep together our bus station. Thank you.
Either this is a really easy question to answer or it's a really difficult one. I don't know what you think life is like for people taking the train out of Fenchurch Street, Liverpool Street, Paddington. Don't you think everybody says the same thing? There aren't enough trains, it's too expensive. Where in the country do you think that doesn't happen? Really? I was in Hartlepool this weekend, and I was in Sedgefield as well. They're very far north, okay, just before you get to Newcastle. I was there all weekend. Hartlepool used to be Peter Mandelson's constituency. Sedgefield used to be Tony Blair's constituency. I was there all weekend. I didn't see one single bus, okay? And you want to say, oh, there aren't enough buses. My life isn't perfect. Really? Just a typical London approach, and you won't Show me the happy traveller. Show me the happy commuter who loves public transport. It's not there, bro. It's just not there. And your life is fine.
Okay.
Okay. I'm standing for Vauxhall. Right, fine. Okay. And this is what happened. Okay, same question. Don't you suppose it's happening in every single constituency, in every single husting? It's the same question. Everybody's saying, what about this, what about that? And every candidate is saying, oh yes, in this constituency where I'm standing, I really care about that stuff and I'll fix it for you. Guess what? There's a whole nation out there. This is a national election. It's about national politics, okay?
Okay. Okay, what I want to do now is I will let people ask some questions, but because we're running out of time, and I also want to get the closing statements in by 8:30, so we can all go home and have some dinner. What I would like to do is, if you're asking a question, if you can really make it brief so that you're trying to get commitments out of the candidates, that would be helpful. So, you want to ask a question about housing? Yeah. So, if you want to make it brief, if you make it brief for me, please.
Because I did actually turn up.
No, I need you to make the question brief.
Because it's not about planning, it's about what we build. Now, until Brexit and climate change knocked housing down the hierarchy, the concerns of the parties, the crisis of housing affordability was the biggest political concern in London, and it still is. In reality, however, housing brings into focus not only the social, but also the environmental, the economic, and the political values of the people who claim to want to represent us. The policies of parties on housing will determine the ability of ordinary people, as they call us, to keep on living in London every bit as much as Brexit, just as what we build in London, with the building industry producing up to 40% of the country's carbon emissions, will determine our ability to reduce our impact on the environment. Now, the Labour Party, as exemplified by Lambeth Labour Council's appalling record on the privatisation of the borough's public land and assets, but also the Liberal Democrat Party and the Conservative Party, are all committed to London's programme of council estate demolition and redevelopment, primarily as unaffordable properties for market sale. We've identified 230 estates in London which have been subject to this. This has led to and will continue to result in not only the loss of tens of thousands of homes for social rent in the middle of a crisis of housing affordability, but also to the release of hundreds of thousands of tonnes of CO2 into London's already polluted air. So, in Vauxhall, a constituency in which the replacement of council housing by investment opportunities for global capital, as exemplified by the opportunity area, is unchecked, why should we vote for any of these main parties? Feel free to clap.
Yeah, I can hear you clearly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make that question brief. I understand all the context, and I want the candidates to answer it very, very briefly, explaining what their position is, because it's an open question, and I would like you to make it closed. So, if I go to Jacqueline.
Sorry, so the Green Party policy is to ensure that we have restoration and a good respect for the current amounts of social homes there are, as well as retrofit every single, 100 million homes by the end of 2030, which will actually mean that there's a decrease in the amount of bills that people have to pay for heating and things like this. The amount of social homes is going to be built at 100 million by 2030, and that will be at a standard that is zero carbon, or this passive house standard. So the typical...
Sorry.
and also we'd like to impose rent controls and make sure that people aren't priced out of their own area.
The question essentially is, so in a constituency which the replacement of council housing by investment opportunities for global capital is all but unchecked, why should we vote for any of you, essentially? So,
instead of retrofitting
So
them.
would you support keeping them?
Oh, I'd absolutely support keeping them because the built environment is a massive thing. If you did the maths on how much it costs to have built the built environment in the first place, it's enormous, and that cost in the first place is never taken into account in the economic considerations. It just isn't there. You know, they just do the maths, we can knock it down, it just isn't there. I love the built environment. I would do my very best not to knock anything down and to retrofit everything. So that's my answer.
thank you very much.
Florence, please.
One of the things that the Lambeth Council's been doing is looking at how to bring back a number of the maintenance contracts back in-house. That would help in terms of addressing some of the long-term problems in a number of our social housing. Growing up in a council estate, I know how vital it is for people to have local homes. Homes that are habitable, not homes that are falling down. If we are going to be looking at regenerating any estate, it's about making sure the residents who live there have a say in what's happening. So that's why there's a commitment that any estate development, regeneration going forward, has to have a full ballot of the residents that live there, and I fully support that. In terms of housing going forward, we have to be honest with ourselves. More and more people, especially in a constituency like Vauxhall, are going to be renting in the private sector. We have to be honest about the challenges there. We cannot build the housing quick enough to house everybody in social housing. So we need to look at one, how we make sure that people in the private rented sector, where there are a number of issues with those properties, that they're getting, we're seeing rent caps introduced and a fair charter so that people know what they're actually paying for. So those are the two things that I would push and support.
So it just seems to me that if what we're trying to do is to make sure that everyone has a safe and secure home at a rent that they can afford, that it just makes absolutely no sense that the starting point for that is knocking down the homes of perfectly good homes of the people who really need them. So I just fail to see how the Labour-run Lambeth Council approach to council homes is anything other than short-sighted, frankly lacking in imagination, because other boroughs have handled this differently, and lacking in humanity in terms of the way that people have been treated through this process. Now, I actually do think that there are some cases where demolition is the right thing to do with the participation of residents. There can be a case for it. But trust in our area is just so broken on this topic that I don't think there will be I cannot imagine for the foreseeable future any way in which we would get residents on board for a programme like that for a good reason until trust is restored once again. So it's absolutely fundamental that we stop knocking down our council homes and find other ways to give people the rent that they can afford. The first thing that I would do if elected as your MP for Vauxhall would be to write to the Secretary of State and ask for a pause on the estate demolition programme and demand an independent inquiry.
Absolutely, when it comes to estate demolition, it is better if we can try and keep the properties there, then absolutely, and if we can try and retrofit and refurbish, that is the most important thing, because absolutely we need to be maintaining these houses. I think the thing is though, what we've got to be looking at is that when we are building these properties in the first place, we've got to be building them to last for longer, because I think there is a trend now that people have, I think a lifespan of certain buildings is only 10 or 20 years, so they don't give it the consistency and the treatment it should be given. So that is one priority we have to focus on. But we also have to look to the maintenance and the quality of our houses. The one big thing I have seen across Lambeth, and I was looking at Dartington House, is that the quality of the housing, it's falling into disrepair, and the councillors just aren't listening. I was challenging the Labour councillors the other day because at Dartington House, for example, there is scaffolding that has been up since April because a concrete slab collapsed in front of the residents. And I said to them, what are you doing about this? And they just say, oh, well, okay, yeah, no, we are getting there somewhere. I'm like, the scaffolding has been up at great expense to taxpayers for 5 to 6 months and absolutely nothing is done. So we have to hold account our councillors more. If we're going to keep people in their homes, we've got to make sure that they are actually maintained to a good quality. So we absolutely have to focus on that. And then just very quickly looking forward, you know, we do have to give everyone a range of options in terms of with their housing. For renters, we've got to make sure that we can keep them there. So that is why we're going to repeal the Section 21 no-fault evictions. And we're wanting to look about how they can have their deposits passported across so that you can actually, so you're not penalised when you're trying to move properties. And just generally as well, we have a first homes programme for those who want to buy, so that we can try and reduce the initial cost for when you are buying and then keep that locked into the property. Yeah. So there's a lot of initiatives that the Conservative Party want to do because home ownership and the ability to have a safe home where you live is absolutely imperative for everyone.
So we'll go to a few more questions, and if you keep them brief so that we can get brief answers out of the candidates as well, please. So if I go to the lady there, please.
Good evening. My question is with regards to what are your policies, your party policies with regards to social care for the under 65s, and actually what are you intending to do as well when you if you become MP in terms of social care and the local authority?
If we go to Sarah next, please.
So we currently have a crisis of social care, not just here in Vauxhall but all around the country. And in part that's because no one's really agreed how we're all going to pay for it. And I know there's a lot of talk about adult social care with an elderly population, and I know that's not what you want to talk about right now, but it has an impact on how the whole thing's funded. What I would do is to increase income tax by a penny on the pound that would be specifically dedicated to funding our NHS and social care. That's not a long-term financing solution for how we think about this issue. That's something that needs to be worked on across party so that we can actually think differently about how we do deliver what people need. It is scandalous the lack of care that's taking place in our own community. Social workers changing week on week on week or not showing up. Incentivised not to deliver the services that people need because the tools and resources for them are not there. So part of what we have is a workforce crisis. A crisis of morale, a crisis of numbers, a crisis of skills, and a workforce that's not being treated well. So it's no surprise that that's passed on to the people who depend on those services. So one of the top priorities would be to deal with that workforce pipeline challenge in order to deliver the services that people need. And then the final thing I would say is that a lot of the care that's done in our community is actually done by people who are not paid to deliver that care, particularly young carers who are really not supported in the way that they should be to look after the people in their family who need their help. So care is not something that's just done by social workers. Care is something that is done by families, by friends, by the community. And we have a very strong policy to support young carers, both to help them to be a carer, but also to pursue their dreams for their own life. I think that's really important. And then finally, I could just close on the community point. I mean, communities need to be resilient in order to meet the needs of the people within them. And so this is why housing is such a fundamental question for us here. It's not just about the roof over our heads, it's about keeping our community together, not tearing the heart out of our community, so that people don't have to move from place to place to place to place, nomadic, not knowing where they're going to settle. That's how communities are torn apart, and that's what makes it very difficult to combat things like isolation, depression, or deliver specific care needs for people, no matter what their age.
Right, so there's a few things that we need to do, and first of all we need to increase both mental and social care funding. We need to make sure that we have parity between mental and physical care in the health service so that everyone is catered for with a good and rapid service. The second thing we need to do is increase the amount of money that's given to carers so that people can feel that caring is not going to cause an issue with their budget. Because if we put more money into carers, there'll be more carers available, and those people that need them can have actually a better choice of who they want, because it's a personal service. I would also fight for having direct payments so that people who are in need of having an independent lifestyle can get it. And so we need to, sorry, I won't keep this too long, so I know it'll be quick. So we also need to have a universal basic income so that every single person, whoever is working or not, is able to access an amount of financial security to ensure a financially secure and independent lifestyle. And for the Green Party, this is £89 per week, and it's a revolutionary policy that no other party is applying. Thank you.
Andrew.
Thank you. I remember the question, is it D? Yeah, so same question from the Exile Lambeth event. Sorry? What?
Sorry, if you just answer.
What am I doing?
Just answer the questions.
Okay, well, I'm very happy to answer it again. Look, we've got a meta-satirical situation at the moment with the Conservatives accusing the Labour Party of being about to borrow £1 trillion, okay? The only people in the room who are experts on borrowing £1 trillion are the Conservatives, so at least they're qualified to maybe have an opinion. When the Conservatives came in, public borrowing was £1 trillion. Today, it's £1.8 trillion. That averages about £80 billion a year. But that's borrowing, that's not spending, that's 80 billion borrowed money every year. Where is it? And I said to you last week, unless we get into that, where is it even going? How do you even borrow 80 billion a year, every year? Where is it? How do you nearly double the national debt from 1 trillion to 1.8 trillion, and then have the cheek to say that the Labour Party are going to do that? They've already done it. And where is it? And unless we get into that, you know, all of the candidates will tell you all day, oh yes, we're going to spend more money on handicapped people under 65. Of course they will. Where is it?
To address your question directly, we do need to actually reform the social care system, and I think that is actually going to be on something with a cross-party consensus here, because it isn't about party politics, it's about making sure that everyone is treated equally and everyone has access to the care that they need. We are going to be doing more investments. For example, if you do go into hospital, we have to make sure that you're in there for the time that you need and that you get the appropriate care, for example, should you leave, and that you are not necessarily staying in A&E and in the hospital wards, when actually it'd be more appropriate for you to be in an alternative provider in a home or a care support. So what we are really driving for is that you need to have your independence and we need to have dignity. And there is a lot that we need to do. All parties will admit this, that we do have to look after our people better, and that is why we're trying to put more investment in. And we'll leave that question. Thank
you. On this one, Dee, it's about how we support people who actually want to play a full part in contributing, and we need to look at the personal care budgets to give people more of that independence and flexibility that they need. The reality is funding over the last few years in social care has gone down, and one of the things that Labour's committed to is reinvesting that money back in. We also need to look at the whole-scale review of the benefit system. Universal credit is not working. One of the things we're committed to is scrapping that. I think we have to be honest to say that there are a number of people, especially in this constituency, who would like to go back into work, but a number of those routes have been cut off from them because of the changes in the benefit system. So it's how we support people like you and others to lead a truly independent life. Sarah touched on the fact that a number of people are carers, include a number of our young people who are carers. My mum suffered from sickle cell anemia and I was her carer. Going through the complexity of replying to the DWP with all the various different departments, for me, as someone who could read and write English, was a challenge. You think about some of the residents in this constituency where English isn't their first language. You think about some of the residents who don't want to contact the DWP because of the fare, that their personal allowance will be taken away from them. So we need a whole-scale review in the social care budget so that people can actually be truly independent instead of being demonised.
So before we go to, I'm going to go to closing statements, but before we do that, I'm going to allow one yes or no question. So if your question is going to get a yes or no out, then yeah. I'm going to ask the gentleman here, please.
Hi there, thank you. Really quickly, earlier in the debate, I think it was the Lib Dem candidate raised the issue of electoral reform and the first past the post system, and I was just wondering if the other candidates could give their views, if they're also in favour of electoral reform, and maybe what they would do instead.
So this is not a yes or no question. If you want to answer it that way, you can. So, okay, right. Are you in favour of electoral reform?
Yes, and I'm in favour of votes of 16, and I'm in favour of votes for our European Union citizens who will not be able to vote in this election next week.
Thank you.
Just that that's not Labour Party policy, but Liberal Democrat policy is votes at 16 and a change to a proportional system of representation.
I think electoral reform is something that we've got to have on the agenda. I think we have a good system at the moment, and I think we'll stick with that for the time being until we do more investigation.
Terrible system. Really bad. We need it changed as soon as possible. 16 to, I'd say even younger, to be honest.
Okay, that's a yes from everybody.
Okay, excellent. Right. You know what, we can take one more yes or no question. One more yes or no question. Right, so let's have a look. I think the gentleman here in the glasses. Oh, there's two people in the glasses. Okay. Right, go on, you in the back.
Kate Hoey was the MP for this area for 30 years, and she was famously not always for towing the party line. I would like to know from each candidate whether they will always tow the party line, or which of their party's current policies would they disagree with.
Okay, what I'm going to do is you can answer that as a yes or no, and you give one policy that you may not, or you have a different view on. Yeah? If you have a different view, you may not.
Yeah. So in terms of standing up to Liberal Democrats in Lambeth Council, we don't have any. So that's not a challenge. In terms of the Liberal Democrats in City Hall, we have one who tends to play a scrutiny role herself, so I'm very happy to join her in playing a scrutiny role. And in terms of party policy in general, yes, absolutely. The reason why I'm a Liberal Democrat is because of my party's value system. And values tend to be the absolute bedrock of everything that we do that brings us together as a community when it comes to a political party. But that doesn't mean that we have to agree with every policy. And I'm very happy to disagree with policy where I think that it's not going in the right direction. The policy that I would like to push on from a Liberal Democrat standpoint, and actually to clarify, is around housing. I don't think that our housing policy goes far enough. I don't think it's specific enough in terms of how it would solve the genuine... I think it's an area that has been thought about wrongly for such a long time that it actually needs a really radical rethink, and I'd really like to push harder on that within the party.
Thanks for the question. The main policy in my party is in the name. Let's just say we care about Brexit, and other stuff is very, very flexible. We have candidates from all religions. We have some hard left types like Claire Fox. We have some old school, conservatives in disguise like me, you might think. So there's a huge, huge variety in the Brexit party. So there isn't even really a question of adhering to a party line, apart from a clean break Brexit and enough of this. Get it done. 78% remain constituency, and I'm not going to win here, so don't worry.
I think, as a Conservative, you would, when you're a part of any party, be following the policy and following the line that they will be taking in terms of, because that is where your principles are going. But I certainly say that there are occasions where you may have to go against that decision if, in the interest of your association or your constituency, that is in their best interest. So I always think you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. In terms of changing laws, I think one of the things we've just seen with the complexities recently with the discussions that maybe the Fixed Time Parliament Act needs to have another relook, because that has caused a lot of deadlock recently, and actually that's prevented us from making decisions to move along Brexit and these decisions. So I think that's probably one that does need to be relooked at.
I think I'd probably have, well, first of all, Green Party doesn't have a whip. I know we only have one MP, so that would be irrelevant anyway, but I would actually try and push forward the net 2030 date to try and be 2025, so that we actually have a really crazily ambitious way of dealing with this. And so then, you know, shoot for the stars and you land on the moon. But then also, I think we should have more devolution of power to increase the amount of citizens' assemblies, so that we actually have a more representation of people rather than politicians who are increasingly lobbied by pressure groups and their party policies have changed according to things that don't represent the people's needs.
I mentioned earlier the fact that we were talking about air pollution and climate emergency, and it's something that does affect all of us, and we need to get more people talking about it. So in terms of party policy, I would have liked my party to be a lot bolder in that, in terms of making sure we had a firm date. So we've said 2030s. I would have liked us to be a lot bolder in that, so that we would really show that commitment. In terms of following the party line, following the party whip, so as a councillor, as an assembly member, I haven't followed a party line because of issues that affect the residents that I'm representing. So my first question as your assembly member was to tell the Mayor of London to cancel the Garden Bridge, because I saw that, you know, that wasn't working for Lambeth. I've talked about some of the policies on the council that I voted against. Another area where I've disagreed with the mayor, who's a Labour mayor, is about the borough mergers. Some of you may be thinking, what is that? It's a point where our two police stations in Lambeth and Southwark merged, so we now only have one police commander covering the whole of Lambeth and Southwark. I felt that that was a right move because of the nature and complexity of policing in both Lambeth and Southwark. So I could give you other examples. So it's not about just towing a party line for the sake of it, it's about what you're standing up for residents.
We're going to go to closing statements now. I'm sorry that we can't get all your questions in. So we'll go first to Andrew, please. 2 minutes.
Well, I don't really have a closing statement. I find all these opening statements. I was watching the ITV debate. Did you see that? Oh, God. And they all had like a minute to make an opening statement. They're all smiling. What are they smiling about? So there it is. Not much of an opening statement and not much of a closing statement. But I do want to say I'm the best dissident, non-conformist, non-mainstream voice here. It's not even a contest. There is an independent guy, I'm a big fan of his, he's called Salah Vauxhall. He's got some very good ideas on education, but he's not here, okay? And if I were here, I'd vote for him, but he's not here, so you can vote for me.
This is like a chain reaction for those of you who are following along with Hustings. So just like many people here, I've lived in many different places, but this is the place that I call home, and that's why I'm standing to be your MP for Vauxhall. Since I moved into a flat off the Stockwell Road in 2010, this has been a place that has really enabled me to be my full self. And our community is a community that welcomes everyone. Each one of us, no matter who we are or where we come from. And it's for that reason that I'm standing to be your MP, because those freedoms are freedoms that I want to protect. The fact of the matter is, though, that for many people here, life is hard. They have to fight for the basics, for a home that they can truly afford, for a job, yes, that pays the bills, but sometimes at the expense of a family life. Not acceptable. Have to fight for an education where every child has the chance to dream. but is also supported in achieving that dream. So for our community to be the best we can be, I think we need to invest in those things that make our country great, our contribution to what this nation is, our cultural institutions down the road, our educational institutions down the road, our transport systems that may be flawed, as we've discussed, but that there's something to work with, our healthcare that we all care so much about, that we want to fight for. But we need to do this in such a way that it doesn't stop us from delivering the basics for every person who calls this home. So, as your MP for Vauxhall, you've told me that you would like me to stop Brexit, most of you have, and work hand in hand to deliver on this local ambition. You've told me that you want me to fight by your side on the issues that you care about, holding Lambeth Council to account, holding City Hall to account, and giving everyone here the opportunity to be listened to as these important decisions are made about the future of our community and how we grow. So, if you choose me as your MP for Vauxhall on the 12th of December, those are the things that I will strive to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, to make any of the changes that we were discussing tonight and do anything, we have to have a strong economy. And that is something that we have been working very hard to get us into this position over the last 9 years. We are now in a position where we can really make the progress that we all want to see. We can start these spending. We're putting 33 billion into our NHS, as I said, to support our fantastic doctors and nurses. We want to make changes in increasing the number of police on the streets to make them safer. We want to encourage more money and 14 billion into education, because education is the key for every child going forward. It is the key that unlocks the door to all opportunities. There is nothing more important here. And it is also important that we focus on climate change and take action. Together, and if we work together, we can achieve so much. I would be honoured to be your MP so that I can listen to you and work with you on all the different issues that have been raised tonight so that we can make Vauxhall an even greater place to be. Thank you.
So Vauxhall has been a safe seat for Labour in this constituency since it was actually begun as a constituency in 1950. Before that, I think in 1918, it was sort of started under a different name, and there was only one person in 1931 who was a Liberal. So it's one of the most safe seats for Labour in the whole party, in the whole nation. And the chances of me getting in are near on impossible, especially when you look at my budget, which is nothing. Under the first past post system, the representation of other parties is basically near to none, and this needs to be immediately changed, because the way that we are acting as other parties is just to provide a voice, to make other parties adapt and listen to what we have to say, because there should be other voices. Now, the Labour Party have actually been slightly bullying in this campaign and been saying that in order to stop the Tories getting in, we should stand down. Why don't they stand down? I don't understand why this is such a one-way system. The Green Party represents all people. It represents a deep respect for life and thought about the future, not just about a short-term electoral system. We need to be thinking about the future, because at the moment we're going into a ditch. Anyway, so one of the most divisive elections in history. We're looking at just thinking about Brexit when we really should be thinking about how to stop this climate catastrophe, how to stop the destruction of so many species that we will never see again, in the way that so many things have been destroyed and going extinct. I don't need to see a video of a koala to know that this is an important thing to happen. Anyway, yeah, sorry, too impassioned maybe, but every vote for a Green makes a difference, and we need to break free of a two-party system, where we can stand up for true action against climate chaos, remaining in the EU, and an end to social injustice. So please, don't just vote out of fear. Actually vote for what you believe in. First of all, probably won't make that much of a difference, but it might stand up for the next election that we mean something. And I hope it's green.
Politics is about choices. The choices in where you choose to invest. the choices and which policy you put forward. Over the last 9 years, coming up to 10 years now, we've seen choices that has had a disproportionate impact on the people in this constituency. In this church, they run a food bank, which I visited. To think that in 2019, people are having to rely on handouts and parcels. This constituency is seeing an increase in people using those food banks. At any one time, if you come here, you'll see people queuing up. People having to survive on those food parcels. That shouldn't be happening. We are the 6th largest nation in the world, but yet people are having to rely on food banks. When I was at school growing up here in Vauxhall, I was on free school meals. But now our young children are having to go to clubs during the summer because that's the only way that they can get a healthy meal. That shouldn't be happening. We've seen homelessness rise. Again, as you're going home tonight, you might see people putting their tents ready to sleep outside Waterloo Station. That shouldn't be happening when we have so many empty properties within this constituency. We're seeing people being forced to work on 0-hour contracts. People who want that stability that a job offers. But yet they might get a call at 2 p.m, 4 p.m. saying, can you work at 8 p.m? How are you supposed to plan your family life around that? We're seeing people pay extortionate rates in terms of childcare, not thinking, should I work? Should I look after my children? Or if I don't, I won't get access to any benefits. We're seeing our teachers leave the profession because they're being stressed with so much exam regime testing. We're seeing our hospitals, including St Thomas's down the road where I had my 2 children, struggling to get nurses to recruit, a lack of midwives. Brexit, and since that vote happens, has caused a number of those problems to increase, which is why I'm committed to making sure that we bring that decision back to the people. If elected as your MP on the 12th of December, all those issues I will challenge because all those issues are issues that I've dealt with growing up here. Thank you.
So thank you very much to the candidates. We're now at 8:30 on the dot, so we're going to draw it to a close. And I'd like to say thank you very much to all of you for coming and putting your questions to everyone. And do vote, and we'll see what happens on December 13th. Thank you very much.